Clark, step back three. Oh, she hit it and draws the foul. Welcome back, Caitlin Clark.
I always wanted Geno to call me just because he's Geno. Like, he's one of the best coaches of all time.
If you're a college player and you're a great college player, like Caitlin was, the delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying the disrespect that they've shown to the WNBA. There's a huge target on this kid's back. Okay, this kid's coming into the league. And Diana said it best. This kid's in for a rude awakening.
Like Geno Auriemma could be the reason why Caitlin Clark is definitely not joining the unrivaled 3-on-3 basketball league.
Understated and ruthless, revenge doesn't always announce itself with noise or chaos. Sometimes it moves in silence, guided by patience and precision. For Caitlin Clark, getting even was never about online clapbacks or dramatic moments in front of cameras. It was handled with far more control and intent. A single decision carried all the weight. She ignored the call, turned down Geno Auriemma, and walked away from UConn's storied legacy, its reputation, and a late-arriving seven-figure offer that surfaced only after years of being overlooked. Auriemma, the iconic UConn women's basketball coach, is now an investor in Unrivaled, the new 3-on-3 women's league launched by former Huskies stars Nafisa Collier and Brianna Stewart. Another reminder of UConn's influence stretching across the sport. To many, the move seemed illogical because 8 weeks of basketball for more than $1 million sounds like an automatic yes. Yet this proposal was never purely financial. It felt like a last-minute lifeline from a system that once minimized her value, underestimated her impact, and only realized her importance when it was far too late.
Like I said earlier, they actually had odds that, she was like third or fourth in the betting odds to be MVP of the WNBA. That's such a slap in the face to every WNBA player. It's unbelievable.
Refusing the offer, Clark didn't merely decline a contract. She erased his leverage completely. And that is why this moment carries weight far beyond the court itself. This was never a highlight reel headline. It was a lesson about power, control, and who truly holds it when narratives shift. For decades, Geno Auriemma stood at the center of women's basketball, deciding which players mattered and which quietly disappeared, with his approval shaping careers and defining relevance. Caitlin Clark shattered that dynamic by building her own momentum outside his system, without his voice, validation, or resources guiding her path. When he finally reached out, the balance had already flipped, the authority had already changed hands. Her silence delivered the message clearly. She no longer needed the connection, the approval, or the bridge he once represented. Every revenge story begins with a single miscalculation, and Geno's wasn't strategic, it was deeply personal. He underestimated her. And that misjudgment reshaped everything forever beyond basketball history itself.
Worst part about new fans, they have no perspective. There's no context. So they just say ridiculous nonsense.
Years before packed arenas and shattered ratings, Clark was just a hopeful young athlete searching for her chance to break through. She has said it herself that UConn felt like the ultimate destination, a dynasty, a factory for legends, and the highest stage the sport could offer. Growing up in Iowa, nothing seemed bigger or more prestigious than wearing that jersey, and for her that vision defined the dream. When recruiting season arrived, everything appeared perfectly aligned, the most electrifying talent of her generation seemingly destined to connect with the most influential recruiter women's basketball had ever known. On paper it looked unavoidable, but reality told a different story. The call never came. Geno never reached out. That silence altered her path, reshaping ambition, resolve, destiny forever.
Wanted UConn to recruit me. I always wanted Geno to call me just because he's Geno. Like, he's one of the best coaches of all time. Geno never called me.
Ignoring Clark entirely, he never called her directly, never contacted her parents, and only loosely relayed interest through an AU coach, a silence that spoke louder than words ever could. For a man celebrated as the sport's ultimate talent evaluator, that absence was intentional, deliberate, and unmistakable. She simply was not a priority. The justification arrived later, with UConn already committed to Paige Buchers and Geno claiming he didn't want two-point guards, an excuse that sounded logical until it crossed a line. He suggested that if Clark truly wanted UConn, she should have called him, placing the burden on a teenager while absolving himself. A coach whose legacy was built on pursuing generational talent decided she wasn't worth a phone call, then blamed her for not chasing harder. That wasn't just a recruiting error, it was open disrespect, the kind that lingers. Clark didn't protest or seek attention. She remembered it. If belief wasn't coming from him, she would earn it elsewhere. That choice led her to Iowa, without banners, instant spotlight, or borrowed prestige. To outsiders it looked like settling, but to Clark it meant independence, ownership, and complete freedom at last.
Thought that all those years ago back in Des Moines, Iowa, that this would be the case right now. And obviously we can see that it's done pretty darn well, and people are excited to see her play at every level.
Established at Iowa as the unquestioned star, she was never Paige's fallback or Geno's discarded option. She became the heartbeat, the burden, and the identity of the entire program. From the instant she took the floor in Iowa City, the energy shifted, and those logo-range shots stopped being mere highlights and turned into bold declarations of arrival and dominance. Sold-out arenas weren't manufactured excitement, they were validation, and record-smashing television ratings weren't coincidence. They were undeniable proof of impact. Every basket increased the pressure, every milestone quietly repeating the same message. This was allowed to slip away. As her influence grew, Geno chose stubbornness over reflection, doubling down with dismissive remarks, brushing her off as a kid, minimizing her brilliance as backyard play instead of recognizing a once-in-a-generation force. But small doesn't fill Madison Square Garden, small doesn't pull women's basketball into the mainstream, and small doesn't reshape culture, media deals, and public attention simultaneously. That's where the irony cuts deepest. Geno closed the door when Caitlin Clark knocked, assuming she would blend in and fade with time. Yet she built the biggest brand the women's game has ever seen without his system, approval, or platform. So when he finally returned holding a contract, Clark didn't argue, celebrate, or justify anything. She simply said no, a single word sharper and heavier than any postseason loss he ever felt. Hidden behind the headlines and quiet investments, Geno Auriemma's stake in the league revealed a deeper struggle for control, relevance, and the illusion that he still shaped the future of women's basketball. Despite trying to stay in the shadows after comments about a young rookie put him under intense scrutiny for weeks, he couldn't let go. Every time Caitlin Clark's name surfaced, he found ways to tether her success to Paige Buecher's, as if Clark's fearless play or fan connections were only meaningful when mirrored by his own system. This wasn't accidental, it was calculated positioning, a desperate attempt to remain part of the conversation. But the public noticed. Fans, analysts, and coaches alike saw through it. Clark didn't need comparisons, disclaimers, or borrowed credibility. She was drawing crowds larger than most professional teams, breaking untouchable records, and transforming the conversation around women's basketball entirely on her own. Meanwhile, Geno smiled for cameras, clinging to a throne that was already slipping, his polished exterior hiding creeping insecurity as attention shifted away. Over time, subtle jabs no longer sufficed, and his quiet undermining evolved into openly targeting the supporters who empowered Clark, revealing just how threatened he truly felt by her rise. For months, his critiques had been thinly veiled as analysis, but by June 2024, the facade crumbled completely. During an appearance on The Dan Patrick Show, the Hall of Fame coach, supposedly a standard-bearer for women's basketball excellence, crossed a line. He didn't just question Caitlin Clark's talent or impact, he targeted her supporters, dismissing the passionate fanbase as delusional and ignorant, claiming they disrespected WNBA players by predicting Clark would dominate the league. He even mocked the betting odds, saying she was ranked 3rd or 4th for MVP chances, and declared that such fans made women's basketball look bad. His statements left no room for nuance, painting her followers as foolish and uninformed, and went so far as to suggest that their enthusiasm was actively harming the sport. In one appearance, he transformed what could have been constructive commentary into a blunt attack, revealing insecurity, bias, and a complete misjudgment of Clark's influence and the loyalty of her growing fan base. All because they believed Clark could contend for MVP as a rookie, a notion that to Geno was not excitement or admiration, but sheer ignorance. Pause and consider that for a moment. Women's basketball was experiencing unprecedented growth, with new viewers tuning in, families filling arenas wearing jerseys, and young fans lining up just to catch a glimpse of Clark. WNBA broadcasts were pulling casual viewers who had never watched before, yet Geno's reaction was not appreciation nor excitement, it was outright dismissal. Instead of celebrating the surge, he pushed against it, framing what should have been a historic moment as a personal affront. This was no thoughtful critique or balanced analysis. It was a targeted attack on the very foundation of Clark's rise. The fans who had helped bring women's basketball into mainstream attention became the focal point of his frustration, and once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. By brushing off not just Caitlin Clark but also the people who powered her success, his words carried weight far beyond typical criticism, amplified by the authority and reputation he held in the sport. By labeling her supporters as clueless, he revealed far more than simple frustration. It exposed just how badly he underestimated her talent and impact. In dismissing the fans, he dismissed the movement, the surge, and the undeniable momentum she had created. His message was clear. The hype was overblown, the attention temporary, and eventually reality would prove him right. That was the bet he made, and it spectacularly backfired. Clark didn't need social media rants, viral quotes, or public rebuttals. Her response unfolded where legacies are truly forged on the court. What followed wasn't mere validation, it was a complete collapse of his credibility. Caitlin Clark captured Rookie of the Year, then pushed even further, earning all WNBA first-team honors, and when MVP voting concluded, she landed exactly where her so-called delusional fans predicted she would, proving every doubt, slight, and dismissive comment utterly wrong while cementing her place at the pinnacle of the sport. Ultimately, the prediction he mocked so publicly became reality, and with it, his authority took a noticeable hit. This was far bigger than one player collecting awards. It was a vindication for the fans he had derided. Every parent bringing a child to a game, every casual viewer tuning in for the first time, every new supporter who believed the buzz. Clark proved they understood the future of the sport better than he ever did. The coldest, most impressive part was how she responded. No speeches, no arguments, no public drama, just results. Night after night, she delivered deep logo-range shots, lightning-quick crossovers that left defenders frozen, and precise passes that sliced through defenses, letting her play speak louder than any words ever could. By the time awards were handed out, the conversation was over. She had answered every doubt without ever needing to mention his name. There was a poetic justice in it all. Geno had long positioned himself as the ultimate authority on women's basketball, yet the very player he underestimated had rewritten the narrative entirely on her own, leaving his influence diminished in the wake of her dominance. The one-season voice who claimed to understand the game better than fans, media, or anyone watching from the outside was quickly proven wrong. The results told a completely different story. The fans were right, Clark was right, and Geno was wrong. Every sold-out arena, every shattered record, every award collected chipped away at the illusion that he still dictated what mattered in women's basketball. She never needed his approval, and she never had it. The true irony is that Clark wasn't out to prove anything to him. She wasn't seeking validation or chasing a personal feud. He wasn't even the focus. She was simply playing her game at the highest level, as she always had, and that alone exposed how outdated his stance had become, making it clear to the entire world that the narrative had shifted. By the end of her rookie season, the discussion wasn't about hype or speculation. It was about how thoroughly she erased every doubt, leaving Geno's remarks to age like relics from another era. What once carried the weight of authority now came across as some of the most off-base, defensive, and bitter commentary the sport had ever heard. Being wrong was clearly something he couldn't accept, and by then, the conversation had shifted far beyond Caitlin Clark's on-court performance. It had become about what she represented. A seismic change in power, a new era rising, and a clear message that women's basketball no longer revolved around him. Instead of recognizing that shift, he fell back on old habits, speaking more, granting more interviews, appearing on more podcasts, and desperately clinging to a spotlight that was no longer his to hold. Her name constantly slipped from his lips, and each time it did, the pattern was predictable. A small compliment wrapped around a subtle jab, praise tinged with warning, attempts to assert authority he no longer possessed. The more he spoke, the more obvious it became. Caitlin Clark wasn't just shattering records. She had firmly planted herself in Geno Auriemma's mind, reshaping the conversation and leaving him consumed by her dominance in ways he couldn't control or ignore. Eventually, words lost their power. For months, Geno attempted to control the narrative with comparisons, side comments, and subtle dismissals, framing Clark's rise as something familiar, borrowed, or merely an extension of his own dynasty. He took shots at her fans, downplayed her impact, and desperately tried to keep himself at the center of the story. Yet Clark kept winning, kept shining, and with every victory, his grip on the conversation slipped further. So he shifted tactics. If influence couldn't be maintained through words, perhaps it could be bought. That's when money entered the equation. By that point, Geno had exhausted every option. He ignored her during recruiting, downplayed her breakout moments, dismissed the supporters who fueled her rise, and attempted to package her stardom as a recycled version of what he had already built. None of it slowed her momentum. Clark continued ascending while his relevance steadily faded. Then a new opportunity appeared, cloaked as innovation. A 3-on-3 women's league backed by Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, with Geno heavily involved behind the scenes. The concept was ambitious, promising, and strategically positioned, but even then, it would not guarantee the influence he so desperately sought. The league had serious financial backing, but what it desperately lacked was identity. A face that could instantly bring millions of fans, media attention, and sponsor interest. That's when the situation became obvious. Despite all the respected names attached to the project, only one player could give it instant credibility, cultural relevance, and star power overnight. Only one athlete had the influence to position the league as a legitimate rival to the WNBA, and that star was Caitlin Clark. Behind the scenes, they tried every tactic to maximize the opportunity, including creating hints, subtle leaks, and carefully crafted suggestions that Clark might participate, all in an attempt to generate hype and keep the conversation alive. But no manufactured narrative could replicate the natural draw and dominance Clark brought, and everyone watching knew she remained the true catalyst for interest, attention, and legitimacy in the emerging league. Then Geno made the move nobody saw coming. He reached out, and reports later revealed an offer exceeding $1 million for an 8-week season, one of the largest sums ever presented to a women's basketball player. Pause and let that sink in. The same coach who once couldn't be bothered to make a single recruiting call was now dangling 7 figures, hoping she would save his latest project. The voice that previously questioned whether her popularity was genuine was suddenly trying to profit from it. The contradiction was glaring. The very coach who had mocked her fanbase now relied on that same crowd to watch, buy tickets, and legitimize his league. The people he had dismissed as unimportant were suddenly essential, and that irony cut deeper than any contract ever could. This wasn't just about business, it was personal. Landing Clark meant he could attempt to rewrite the story, claim her success still tied back to his influence, and regain a semblance of control he had long lost. He could have tried to frame her success as just another branch of the empire he had built, a way to maintain relevance rather than acknowledging it was no longer needed. He could have attempted to reassert control, but Clark saw through it immediately. When the offer landed in front of her, she didn't see opportunity. She saw a test, a final attempt to reclaim power from someone who had spent years minimizing her accomplishments. Her response was swift, decisive, and flawless. One word: no. No explanations, no counteroffers, no hesitation. That single word carried more weight than every interview he had ever given combined. She didn't need his money, his platform, or his validation. The man who once overlooked her was now begging for her participation, and she declined with quiet precision. That moment sealed the story completely. The rejection was absolute. Geno Auriemma, long considered the ultimate gatekeeper of women's basketball, had been reduced to offering a fortune to the very player he once dismissed, and she walked away untouched, unshaken, and fully in control. And she declined with complete composure. No spectacle, no bitterness, no drama. Just a simple, decisive refusal. The aftermath was swift and unforgiving. Without Clark, the unrivaled league instantly lost its center of gravity. Its appeal diminished overnight, and what was meant to appear bold and commanding instead revealed sheer desperation. The massive offer no longer looked like confidence, it looked like need. The project required her far more than she ever required it. Fans saw it clearly. Online reactions flooded in, ridiculing the notion that Clark could rescue a system that had never truly respected her. Geno's carefully plotted strategy collapsed in a single move. Clark didn't rant, didn't publicly humiliate him, and didn't even acknowledge him beyond her decision. She simply walked away, and that quiet exit struck harder than any words could have, because the truth was undeniable. Geno's era had ended and a new chapter led by Clark had begun. His hold on the sport was gone, and Caitlin Clark didn't just challenge it, she made it obsolete. For decades, figures like him dictated the paths to success, shaped the narratives, and decided who mattered and who had to wait. Clark shattered that structure entirely. She didn't need banners, borrowed prestige, or approval from the old guard. She built something independent, something lasting, and something entirely her own. By turning down the $1 million offer, she sent a message that reverberated far beyond a single contract. The future belongs to the players, not the gatekeepers. That's why this moment cuts so deeply. Geno's biggest miscalculation wasn't overlooking her early. It was assuming women's basketball could not thrive without his authority. He believed he was essential. She proved otherwise. And that lesson didn't stop with him. It served as a warning to every coach, executive, and power broker still clinging to control. Clark's rejection wasn't just personal. It was a seismic shift, a clear dividing line between the old structure and the new era, showing an entire generation of athletes that they do not need anyone's permission to lead, dominate, and redefine the game. All it took was a single quiet decision, one refusal, one resolute no. In the end, this was never merely a feud between a coach and a player. It was a warning shot, a clear signal that power in women's basketball has shifted permanently. The old model depended on gatekeepers, permissions, and approval from the top, but Caitlin Clark proved none of that is necessary anymore. She didn't ask to be crowned, nor did she demand control. She earned it through her fans, her record-breaking performances, and undeniable impact on the game. One quiet decision exposed an entire system that believed it would last forever, revealing how influence can change hands in an instant. Stories like this are happening more often than people realize, behind the scenes, off the court, away from press conferences and headlines. That's exactly why Courtside Leaks exists. To uncover the real shifts in power, the untold stories, and the moments that are quietly reshaping the future of women's basketball. The truth behind the game isn't always visible, and the story the league doesn't want you to see is happening right now. To connect the hidden dots, uncover the backstage moves, and follow the shifts in power that are quietly reshaping women's basketball, you need to stay locked in. Every leak, every whispered strategy, every moment they try to hide, we cover it all. From players challenging the old guard to new leagues and opportunities redefining the sport, this is where the real drama unfolds and the future is being written. Hit like, subscribe, drop a comment, and share this video so you never miss an update. Stay with Courtside Leaks, your home for the untold stories, the unseen battles, and the truth behind every WNBA headline. Because while the cameras show one story, the real power moves happen behind the scenes, and the next shift is already underway.